As the first light of dawn spreads slowly across the Nile, you stand at the edge of a world that has awakened like this for thousands of years. The river lies calm before you, a long ribbon of dark water reflecting the pale colors of the sky as the sun begins its slow climb above the desert horizon. For a moment, everything feels still. The cool air carries the scent of wet earth and reeds, and the only sound is the gentle movement of water brushing against the muddy banks. Then, gradually, the silence begins to fade. Life stirs along the river. You hear at first as distant movement inside the village behind you. A door of mud brick and wood creaks open. Somewhere a donkey shifts its weight and snorts impatiently. The faint scratching of stone against grain drifts through the air as someone begins grinding wheat for the day's bread. In ancient Egypt, the day always begins early, because once the sun rises fully above the horizon, the heat will soon turn the land into a blazing furnace. These cool moments before sunrise are precious, and every worker along the Nile knows it. As the sky brightens, thin streaks of gold stretch across the water. Small boats begin to appear on the river's surface, their long wooden hulls cutting silently through the current. Some drift with the slow flow of the Nile, while others unfurl simple square sails that catch the morning wind. Fishermen stand carefully inside their vessels, casting nets into waters that have fed entire civilizations. Farther downstream, a larger cargo boat moves steadily toward a nearby town, its deck stacked with clay jars, bundles of papyrus, and sacks of grain harvested from the fertile fields beyond the riverbanks. For the people who live here, the Nile is not just a river. It is the center of everything. It provides water for crops, roots for trade, fish for food, and the fertile soil that makes life possible in a land surrounded by desert. Every village along its shores depends on its steady rhythm, and every sunrise marks the beginning of another cycle of work. Behind you, the village now begins to fully awaken. Farmers gather their tools and prepare to walk toward the fields where barley and emmer wheat grow in thick rows nourished by the river's annual floods. Women carry clay jars toward the water's edge, their steps steady and practiced as they balance the heavy containers against their hips or on their heads. Children step outside sleepy-eyed, blinking into the rising light, while the first cooking fires send thin columns of smoke curling into the sky. Among all these familiar morning rituals, there is one place where the day begins differently. A small house near the edge of the village stands beside a shaded work area made from wooden beams and woven reeds. It is not large or impressive. Its walls are made from the same mud brick as the surrounding homes, and its roof is flat, covered with packed clay to keep out the relentless sun. Yet, inside this humble space lives a craftsman whose work touches nearly every part of Egyptian life. You step closer, and inside the shaded workshop you see him, a carpenter. Before most of the village has even finished their first meal of bread and beer, his day has already begun. He sits quietly beside a rough wooden workbench, inspecting a plank of timber brought upriver days earlier. Wood is rare in Egypt, far rarer than stone or clay, and every piece that arrives here has traveled a long and valuable journey. Some come from distant forests beyond Egypt's borders, floated down rivers or carried across the Mediterranean. Others come from the few hardy trees that grow along the Nile itself, twisted trunks shaped by wind and sun. To a carpenter, each piece of wood holds possibility. The tools beside him are simple but precise. A copper-bladed saw rests against the bench. A wooden mallet lies nearby, its handle worn smooth by years of use. Chisels of different sizes are carefully arranged on the table, their edges sharpened for delicate work. These tools may look humble, but with them Egyptian craftsmen have built boats that travel hundreds of miles along the Nile, furniture that fills homes and temples, doors that protect entire households, and wooden chests that hold grain, tools, and treasured belongings. Without carpenters, daily life along the Nile would be almost impossible. The boats that carry fishermen onto the river would rot and sink. The stools and tables inside homes would collapse. The doors that guard families at night would fall apart under desert winds. Even the great monuments of Egypt rely on wooden tools, scaffolding, and construction equipment made by skilled craftsmen. And so, while farmers tend the fields and fishermen cast their nets, men like this carpenter quietly shape the objects that hold the entire society together. You watch as he lifts the plank and runs his hand across the grain, feeling the texture of the wood as if reading a story written inside it. He studies the curves and imperfections, imagining the shape it will become. Perhaps part of a fishing boat's hull, perhaps a stool for a household nearby, perhaps a wooden chest that will protect grain during the long months between harvests. Outside, the sun now rises fully above the horizon, and the Nile glows with reflected light. The river is alive with movement. The village hums with work. Another day in ancient Egypt has begun. But while farmers step into their fields and fishermen guide their boats onto the water, one man begins his day shaping something that every Egyptian household depends on: wood. You step into the carpenter's workshop as the morning light filters through a loose canopy of reeds stretched above the wooden beams. The shade is thin but enough to soften the harsh desert sun that already begins to rise higher above the Nile. Inside this modest workspace, the air smells of dry timber, dust, and the faint sweetness of freshly cut wood. Nothing here is luxurious. The floor is packed earth, the walls are simple mud brick, and the workbench itself is made from thick planks supported by sturdy legs carved long ago by another craftsman. Yet, within this humble space, objects essential to Egyptian life are shaped every single day. You move closer to the workbench and begin to notice the tools scattered across its surface. They appear simple at first glance, but each one carries generations of knowledge behind its design. The carpenter reaches first for an adze, one of the most important tools in his craft. Its curved metal blade is fixed to a wooden handle, forming a tool that functions almost like an inverted axe. With controlled movements, he swings it downward, shaving thin curls of wood from the surface of a plank. Each strike is careful, precise, guided not by measuring devices but by experience. The rhythm is steady. Lift, strike, lift, strike. Small fragments of wood scatter across the ground beneath the bench. Nearby lies another essential tool, the saw. Unlike modern steel blades, this one is made from copper, its teeth sharpened to cut slowly through the grain. When the carpenter draws it back and forth across a thick piece of timber, the sound is dry and deliberate. Sawdust gathers beneath his hands as the wood gradually separates. Cutting wood in ancient Egypt requires patience. Copper is softer than iron, which means every cut must be controlled and deliberate to avoid damaging the blade. Next to the saw rests a set of chisels of different sizes, each designed for a specific type of carving. Some are thin and sharp for delicate details, others wider for shaping joints. When the carpenter places one against the wood and taps it gently with a wooden mallet, a perfectly controlled slice breaks away. The mallet itself is simple, carved from a single block of hardwood, its surface polished smooth by years of constant use. Together, the chisel and mallet allow him to shape wood with remarkable precision. But tools alone do not define the craft. The type of wood itself matters just as much. You notice several different planks leaning against the wall of the workshop. Some are pale and light, others darker and heavier. Each comes from a different tree and carries different qualities. Acacia wood, grown in Egypt's dry regions, is strong and resistant, making it useful for sturdy objects that must endure heavy use. Sycamore wood, softer and easier to carve, is often used for furniture and household items. And then there is the most valuable timber of all, cedar. Imported from distant forests beyond Egypt's borders, cedar is prized for its straight grain and durability. Only the most important constructions or wealthy clients can afford pieces of this precious wood. The carpenter studies each plank carefully before choosing which one to use. Every piece of timber must be used wisely because replacing it is difficult and expensive. Once he has selected the wood, he begins the careful process of shaping it into useful forms. This is where the true skill of the craft becomes visible. Instead of relying on nails, which are rare and costly, Egyptian carpenters often join pieces of wood using a technique known today as mortise and tenon joinery. You watch as the carpenter carves a rectangular slot into one piece of wood. This slot is the mortise. Then he shapes a matching projection on another piece, called the tenon. When the two pieces slide together perfectly, they form a strong and stable connection that can hold furniture, doors, and boats together for years. To secure the joint even further, small wooden pegs are hammered through both pieces, locking them firmly into place. The carpenter tests the fit of the joint, sliding the pieces together and pulling them apart again, adjusting the shape with careful strokes of the chisel until the connection is flawless. This process requires patience and extraordinary attention to detail. A joint cut too loosely will weaken the structure. A joint carved too tightly will crack the wood. Once the pieces are joined, the final stage begins, hand carving and shaping. With smaller chisels and knives, the carpenter smooths the edges and refines the surface. Sometimes decorative patterns are added, especially when crafting furniture or chests for wealthy households. Other times the work remains plain and practical, built simply to last. Around the workshop you begin to notice the many different objects created here. A half-finished wooden stool stands near the wall, its legs carefully shaped and ready to be assembled. A sturdy door frame leans against another beam, waiting to be installed in a nearby house. On the ground lies the curved frame of a fishing boat hull, slowly taking shape piece by piece. Even agricultural tools begin here, where wooden handles are carved for hoes. Sickles and plows used in the fertile fields along the Nile. Each object serves a purpose. Each piece of wood becomes part of someone's daily life. And as the carpenter continues shaping the timber before him, it becomes clear just how deeply this craft supports the entire community around the river. Boats depend on it. Homes depend on it. Tools depend on it. Without the careful work done inside small workshops like this one, the rhythm of Egyptian life would quickly begin to fall apart. Because without carpenters like him, much of daily Egyptian life would simply stop. You leave the carpenter's workshop and step toward the small house that stands only a few paces away. Built from sun-baked mud bricks that hold the warmth of the day and the coolness of the night. From the outside, it appears simple, almost indistinguishable from the other homes scattered across the village. But as you move closer and pass through the low wooden doorway, you begin to understand that this space is the center of an entire family's life. The interior is quiet and dim compared to the bright sunlight outside. Light enters through a small opening in the wall and through the doorway behind you, illuminating the packed earth floor and the rough surfaces of clay jars lined neatly against the walls. The structure of a typical Egyptian home is modest but practical. Thick mud brick walls help keep the interior cool during the intense desert heat, while the flat roof above is supported by wooden beams covered with reeds and clay. There are only a few rooms, each serving multiple purposes throughout the day. One corner stores baskets filled with grain. Another area holds tools and household items. Near the center of the room sits a low table and woven mats where the family rests, eats, and spends time together after the day's work. Across the room, you notice the carpenter's wife kneeling beside a clay oven built into the floor. She is already preparing the family's meal. With steady, practiced movements, she grinds grain between two stones, pushing the upper stone back and forth over a handful of wheat. The sound of stones scraping against grain fills the room with a slow, rhythmic pattern that has echoed through Egyptian homes for thousands of years. Gradually, the grain becomes flour, which she mixes with water to form a thick dough. She shapes the dough into small, flat loaves and places them inside the hot clay oven, where they begin to bake. The smell of fresh bread soon spreads through the house. Nearby, clay bowls contain the other simple foods that sustain the family. Fish caught earlier from the Nile rests on a plate beside a few onions and herbs. These ingredients form the foundation of most meals for ordinary Egyptian households. Bread provides the bulk of daily energy. Fish offers protein from the river's abundant waters, and onions add flavor and nutrients. Beside the food sits a large clay jug containing a thick, nutritious drink that Egyptians consume every day: beer made from fermented grain. It is not the clear beverage many people imagine today, but a cloudy mixture that serves as both nourishment and refreshment. While the meal is prepared, the children move quietly through the room. They are curious, alert, watching everything that happens around them. In ancient Egypt, childhood is not separated from the adult world of work the way it often is today. Children learn by observing the routines of their parents, slowly absorbing the skills and responsibilities that will shape their own futures. There are no formal classrooms here, no written lessons passed down through books. Instead, knowledge travels through demonstration, repetition, and daily life. You notice one of the children standing near the doorway that leads toward the workshop. His eyes follow the movements of his father outside. Every strike of the mallet, every careful cut with the chisel becomes part of an unspoken lesson. Soon the carpenter himself steps into the house, brushing small fragments of wood dust from his hands. The morning's work has already left marks across his arms and clothing. Yet, as he sits beside his family, the tension of the workshop fades. The children gather around him while the smell of bread continues to fill the room. The meal is shared simply. Fresh loaves are broken by hand and dipped into small portions of fish and herbs. Clay cups of beer are passed between the adults. There are no elaborate dishes or decorations, but the food provides everything needed to sustain another long day of labor. After eating, a quieter moment settles over the home. The carpenter reaches for a small piece of scrap wood that he carried from the workshop. It is nothing valuable, just a leftover fragment from a larger plank. Yet, in his hands it becomes something more. His son watches closely. The carpenter kneels beside him and places the piece of wood onto a low surface. Then he selects one of his simplest tools, a small carving knife used for delicate shaping. Instead of working quickly, he moves slowly, deliberately, showing each movement with care. The boy's eyes follow. Every motion of the blade is thin curls of wood peel away from the surface. After a moment, the carpenter pauses and gently places the tool into the boy's hands. It is not yet a real lesson in craftsmanship. The child is too young to master the skill. But this small moment carries enormous meaning. With patience, the father guides the boy's hands, helping him press the blade carefully into the wood and shape the surface. The child laughs softly as the wood begins to change beneath his touch. In villages like this one, skills are rarely taught through formal instruction. They are passed down through moments exactly like this, quiet demonstrations between parent and child, repeated over many years until the knowledge becomes instinct. Around them, the house continues its gentle rhythm. The mother cleans the bowls from the meal and prepares to return to her own tasks. Outside, the sounds of the village drift through the doorway, farmers speaking to one another in the distance. Footsteps on packed earth paths, the faint creaking of boats moving along the Nile. Inside this modest home, something more lasting is taking place. Because for many Egyptian craftsmen, the trade is not simply a way to earn food or exchange goods. It is part of family identity, carried forward from one generation to the next. And as the carpenter watches his son carefully carve the surface of that small piece of wood, it becomes clear that this craft is more than work. For many Egyptian craftsmen, the trade was not just work. It was a legacy passed from father to son. You step once more toward the river, where the rhythm of life along the Nile becomes impossible to ignore. From the high banks you can see movement everywhere, boats sliding across the water, farmers guiding animals through the fertile fields, traders loading baskets of goods onto wooden vessels bound for distant towns. In ancient Egypt, the Nile is not just a source of water. It is the main road of the entire civilization. Every movement of grain, stone, tools, animals, and people flows along this river. And when you begin to look closely at how this enormous system works, you start to see how deeply the carpenter's craft is woven into the economy that keeps Egypt alive. Boats are the first and most obvious example. Nearly everything that moves across Egypt travels by water. The Nile flows from south to north, while the prevailing winds blow from north to south, making it possible for boats to move in both directions with remarkable efficiency. When a vessel travels north, it drifts naturally with the river's current. When it returns south, sailors raise large square sails that capture the wind and carry them upstream. This simple balance of water and wind turns the Nile into the most efficient transportation route in the ancient world. But none of these boats exist without carpenters. As you watch the vessels passing along the river, it becomes clear that each one is the result of careful craftsmanship. The curved hulls, the fitted planks, The sturdy masts and rudders, all of them, depend on skilled hands shaping timber into strong, watertight structures. Fishing boats, cargo barges, and transport vessels all begin their lives in workshops like the one you saw earlier in the village. And these boats do not last forever. The river is powerful. Hidden sandbanks scrape against wooden hulls, storms strain their joints, and constant exposure to water weakens even the strongest timbers over time. This is why carpenters are constantly repairing and rebuilding them. Every damaged plank must be replaced. Every cracked joint must be reinforced. Because without those repairs, the river traffic that feeds Egypt's economy would quickly grind to a halt. Every repaired boat means another fisherman can return to the river. Every repaired boat means another shipment of grain can reach the markets. Every repaired boat means another connection between distant villages remains alive. But boats are only one part of the carpenter's economic importance. As you walk farther through the village, you begin to notice how many structures rely on wooden craftsmanship. Houses themselves depend on wooden beams that support flat roofs and hold reed coverings in place. Doors carved from thick planks protect families from wind, animals, and thieves. Inside these homes, stools, chests, beds, and storage boxes hold the tools and supplies that people depend on every day. Beyond the village, the importance of carpentry becomes even greater. Large agricultural communities depend on massive wooden storage buildings known as granaries. These structures hold the harvest collected during Egypt's fertile growing seasons. Inside them, thousands of sacks of grain are stored safely above the ground, protected from moisture and animals. Without strong wooden supports, these buildings would collapse under the weight of their own contents. Temples and large construction sites also rely on carpenters, even though their walls are made from stone. Wooden scaffolding allows workers to reach high surfaces when carving hieroglyphs or raising massive blocks into place. Wooden sledges transport heavy stones across desert ground. Even the tools used by masons and builders require wooden handles carefully shaped by craftsmen. In other words, carpenters do not simply create household items. They support nearly every industry that keeps Egypt functioning. The relationship between carpenters and farmers is especially important. Farmers grow the grain that feeds the population, but they depend on wooden tools and structures to do their work. Plows used to turn the soil rely on sturdy wooden frames. Handles for hoes and sickles must be shaped and replaced when they break. Storage chests hold seeds between planting seasons. Even irrigation systems that guide water from the Nile into farmland often include wooden gates or supports that must be repaired over time. This connection forms a powerful partnership between craftsman and farmer. One produces food. The other creates the tool.